You were dynamite last night, sir. What was it? Baby, baby, baby ho. Y'all, thanks so much for having me this weekend. Y'all have been such a highlight of my 2017 so far. Right when I'm done, I get the privilege of flying back to New York to be with my wonderful family. But thank you so much for allowing me to be an adopted member of the Arizona family for one weekend. Thank you so much. But I thought before I left, I thought I would tell you a couple more stories. I hope that's okay. All right, so where do we begin? Let's see. Let's begin like this. Like a crimson yoke, the dawn sun oozed over the horizon. The shadows of leafless trees stretching across the country like malnourished men, dust coiling in the wind. And around the bend of a narrow road comes a solitary traveler. He wipes the perspiration from his brow, tightens the straps on his backpack, and continues down the road on his way to work, thinking of his wife, thinking of his infant son. When behind him, he hears a rustling sound. The man turns on his heels and squints into the darkness amidst the trees, looking for the source of the sound, but sees nothing. He hesitates a moment, turns around, and continues on his way to work, gravel crunching beneath his shoes, when again he hears behind him the same rustling sound. He turns and takes a step towards the trees, squinting into the darkness, looking for the source of the sound, but again sees nothing. He pauses a moment, swallows deeply, takes a deep breath, but before he can turn around, he is struck in the back of the skull, ambushed by 3 bandits. They knock him to the ground. He collapses on the gravel, nose bursting open, blood dripping down his chin. They pound him in the back of the shoulder. They twist his arm behind his back until the shoulder dislocates. They pound him in the kidneys. They pound him in the ribs. And though he screams for help and tries to defend himself, they pound him all the more. One of them taking his ankle, turning until he hears his own bones break. He screams. They strip him of his clothes. They take his backpack. And after pounding him for a few more minutes, the 3 bandits flee across the country, through the shadows, and toward the red rising sun, leaving the solitary man on the road, coughing, gasping, lungs filled with dust, bubbling in a pool of his own blood, fading in and out of consciousness, wondering if this for him is how it's all going to end, wondering if anyone will stop and help, wondering if for him there is any hope. On the surface, a lot of us don't have a lot in common with this individual on the road. Most of us are fortunate enough that we don't know what it's like to be physically beaten. But before we go on, I want to acknowledge that I know some of us in here do know what that's like. I don't. And for those of you that do, I'm so sorry. And I wish there was something I could do. But though a lot of us don't know what it's like to be physically beaten, externally beaten, every single person in this room knows what it's like to be internally beaten. I mean, for all of us, we've all at different times in life, in different moments, we've all been beaten down by loneliness. Wondering if anybody really understands, wondering if anybody really sees beneath the surface and can actually see us. We all know what it's like to be beaten down with judgment. To have somebody tell us that this is what God thinks of us, or that this is the sum of our value based on something we've done, or based on their opinion of us. We all know what it's like to be beaten down with disappointment. An athletic disappointment, a relational disappointment, a family disappointment, an academic disappointment. We all know what it's like to be beaten down with loss. Maybe you've lost someone you love to death, or divorce, or maybe just a friendship eroded and eventually crumbled altogether, we all know what it's like to be beaten down with fear. Fear about the future, fear about the present, fear if we matter, fear if we have purpose, fear if we have talent. We all know what it's like to be beaten down by comparing ourselves to others, right? Why can't I look like this person? Why can't I have the talent of this person? If only I could speak as eloquently or be as charismatic or likable as this person. We all know what it's like to be beaten down with expectations. That silent brass trumpet that is always proclaiming to us, you have to be more. You've got to succeed. You've got to accomplish. You've got to be these 10,000 things or you're never going to amount to anything. Though we may not know what it's like to be beaten down externally, every single one of us, if we were to open our chests and remove our hearts, would find it battered, bleeding, and bruised. And while that's true, it's so easy to forget that every single person in our life is in some way this person on the road. It's so easy to forget. But then there are these moments. There are these very, very unique moments where we are reminded with such clarity of the pain of other people. So 12 years ago, I was living in Chicago. Kristen and I both were. And we got the wonderful privilege of intersecting with one of the most magnificent people I have ever met. It was a 16-year-old girl named Blake. Blake was extraordinarily talented. She was intelligent, she was dynamic interpersonally, and she was a really, really gifted musician. So gifted that Blake actually, by herself, led music for our entire church at the age of 16. I mean, she just had this kind of fluorescent soul that everybody like moths wanted to float around every single day. She had one of those contagious laughs that when she laughed, even if you didn't know what was funny at all, you started laughing along with her. And over time, Kristen and I became really good friends with Blake. We, would see her every week. We went out to coffee, went to movies, talked back and forth, got to know her parents, got to know her brother, got to know her sisters, really established this remarkable friendship. So 2 years passed. Blake eventually graduates from high school. And due to some of the things that she has achieved in that 4 years, she has received a full-ride scholarship to the University of Texas in Austin. And so though we're living, in Chicago at the time, and Blake is going to be departing and leaving in Austin, we're expecting that the strength of our friendship is going to mean there is not one single hiccup in the relationship. We're not expecting anything to change, though there's now going to be 1,000 miles between us. But the day Blake left, the day she walked down that airport terminal, got on that plane, and flew south, it was just it's like she just evaporated. And we suddenly and immediately stopped hearing from her. This person that we had spoken to nearly every week or seen nearly every week for 2 years, all of a sudden every correspondence was just returned with radio silence. Every phone call, never answered, never returned. Every text message, nothing. Every email, nothing. This went on for months. And as the days trickled by, like anybody would with a dear friend, you begin to wonder, is something wrong? What's happening? Have we done something? You're trying to do the relational arithmetic that would add up to going from complete intimacy and connection to complete distance and silence. And after months, I talked to Blake's parents and I found out a little bit of what was going on in her life. Blake went from Chicago to Austin to the University of Texas. She started school, and Blake found herself surrounded by a group of people who claimed to care about her, but really they just cared about getting things from her. And so they kind of invited Blake into this world of substance abuse, and Blake dipped her toe in, and before she knew it, she had been swallowed alive. And so her parents tell me this, and Kristen and I are immediately concerned. And so we kind of continue with the same pattern, calling her, emailing her, texting her, silence, silence, silence. But as life would have it, 6 months later, again, you can call it divine, you can call it an accident, you can call it whatever you want. But for completely separate circumstances, Krista and I end up moving to Austin, Texas. So now we are again in the same city as Blake. In fact, we are actually living on the west campus of the University of Texas. Like to the point where we could have at any moment passed her on the sidewalk. And so now that we're in the same town, we really want to reach out to her and connect with her even more. But every time we reach out, we get nothing until months later, I finally get a response and I invite Blake to a cup of coffee. And so we go to this very hipster Austin coffee shop where like all the tables and chairs are like metallic rusted yard furniture and there's like colorful Christmas lights even though it's June. And I sit in this booth and I get my beverage and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, how do I, approach this conversation with her? I haven't spoken to Blake in nearly a year, and besides that, I know some things about her, and she isn't aware that I know them, and so is it even appropriate to bring that up? And so I'm in my own head to such depths, contemplating what I should say, that Blake has approached the table and has been standing there for about 10 seconds, and I don't even realize it's her. Finally, she says, "Hi, Josh." And I look up and I see this face and I can't even tell that it's Blake. Her physical appearance had changed so much. You could tell she hadn't washed her hair and I don't know how long. It was knotted and matted to her head. She had lost so much weight that it looked like a stiff breeze might blow her away. She was just skin and bones. Her eyes had sunken back into their sockets. And she sits down, and as we start talking, I begin to realize that the transformation in her has not just been external, it's been internal too, because all of that joy and all of that electricity that I was so accustomed with her, it was just nowhere to be found. It had been replaced with apathy and anger and hate for God, hate for people, hate for her family, hate for her friends, hate even for herself. And as we're sitting there talking, I feel as if that strange, bizarre, mystical, indescribable hand from heaven reaches down, grabs me by the collar and goes, "Josh, do you remember that story I told thousands of years ago that now today you know as the Good Samaritan? Do you remember that story? Do you remember that solitary traveler?" And it's like silently, I'm like, "Yeah, I remember that story." And it's if this hand's going, "Well, guess what? That person's right in front of you right now. Josh, do you remember that story?" And in that story, as the solitary traveler lies there on the road, naked in the lagoon of his own blood, and as the dawn sun now becomes that candle of afternoon, a priest comes along the same road. And as he rounds the bend, clutching the black lapels on his finely pressed jacket, he sees the traveler lying there. The traveler who is barely conscious, thirsty beyond what we can imagine. He looks up and he reaches one hand toward the priest, and the priest sees him, and the priest takes one step toward the traveler, but then he backs away. And he thinks to himself, wait a minute. What in the world happened to this person? See, if I go and help this person, how do I know for sure that whoever did this to him isn't still hiding in all these trees? If I stop, they might do the same thing to me. And the priest stands there for a moment. He goes, "You know what? I would love to stop and help this person, but I have an obligation. I have a responsibility. I'm supposed to be in the next town, and I have to deliver a really, really important sermon, and they're counting on me. I can't let those people down." And the priest stands there, and maybe he thinks to himself, "You know what? If this was any other day, I could stop and help, but this just isn't a good time. I'm just too busy." Or maybe the priest thinks to himself, "You know what? I don't know if this person keeps sinister company. And if I, a person of immaculate, pristine reputation, am seen with someone of ill repute, then what are people going to think of me?" The point is, y'all, the priest comes along, he sees this beaten person on the road, and he finds an excuse to do nothing. Whether it's I'm too busy, whether this is too intense or too extreme, whether this is I have somewhere I need to be, regardless, he finds a reason to ignore the hurting person right in front of him. And so he stays close to the wall and he walks around and off